Welcome to Side Effects with an A. When effect is normally used, it's a noun. It's already occurred.
Effect is a verb meaning action. Action influences outcomes.
I'm Scott McGohan.
And I'm Anne-Marie Singleton. We will provoke you to think differently.
Side Effects, where problems are defined, solutions exposed.
All right, Side Effects.
Welcome to Side Effects. I'm Scott McGohan.
And I'm Anne-Marie Singleton.
We have a great guest with us here today, good friend of mine, Meyer. I'll say a couple things about you. Number one, amazing leader, author, and leadership coach. Probably even more importantly than that is father and husband, and a real gift to our community. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah. So a little bit about, so that's a lot of information about J. Meyer, right?
Yeah.
So maybe just a little bit about, hey, why did leadership and passion and all your gifts back to the community, where did all that start?
Well, I was just having a conversation with my daughter the other day. She's 29, and she has this opportunity presented to her of possibly running a small business. And she's like, Dad, what do I do? And I said, haven't you always pictured yourself leading? And she goes, well, yeah. And I said, well, not everybody sits around and does that and sees themselves in a leadership role. I said, we need good leaders, we need good followers. And I said, ever since I was little, I always kind of saw myself in the lead role. Wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realized there's responsibility that comes with that.
Right.
It's one thing to say, hey, let's go. It's another thing to know where you're going and garner the support of others through influence and so on and so forth. So I think I was one of those people that was born as a leader. I don't believe that, the myth that you can't lead unless you're born that way. I think people can learn how to lead.
But some people definitely have natural tendencies towards that.
Yeah.
So, and you've done quite a few things with that leadership. Maybe give a little background on some of the things that you've done.
Yeah. Well, it started in my athletic career. So I played high school basketball, college basketball, and never saw a shot I didn't like, So I was like this and I was captain of both teams, and we enjoyed a lot of success in those years. And then went to work at a corner drugstore in downtown Covington, Ohio, and luckily the owner saw my leadership qualities, and over a period of time we created a partnership where I kind of could lead the growth of the business. And then
So pharmacist by trade.
Right. Yes. And
then you sold that, right?
Yeah, we grew that into a pretty nice nursing home pharmacy. Actually sold, and I had new majority owners that I partnered with, and grew it some more over a 7-year period. And actually, we're fortunate enough again to go through an acquisition and sell. And then I started having this itch to move on. It's kind of like waking up one day and saying, do I want to do this the rest of my life? Because I was in a leadership role and was loving it, enjoy healthcare, very passionate about it. But it's like what really jacked me up at the pharmacy was once a month I would have these leadership meetings with everybody that worked there. And we'd have 6 one-hour meetings round the clock because we were 24/7. And it was mandatory, and people would come, and I'd give them an update on the company, and then we would do leadership training, because I always feel like everyone can lead from where they sat. And I would get all jacked up that day. So it's like, I want to do something when I walk away from this business that will allow me to feel that same passion. And that led me to doing work at Aileron. I do my own stuff today, and helping clients and coach clients.
Well, one of the things that before we even started, and I've known Jay for a long time, and one of the greatest gifts in my friendship with Jay is just his ability to be vulnerable. So what we're going to talk about is an issue that's going on in our country. It's going on in our state. Unfortunately, it's going on in our city, and it is an absolute epidemic, and it's around the issue of opioid overdoses. And society has a really hard time figuring that out and unpacking that. And one of the things I love about you is you're not afraid to tell your story. And so what that means to you personally, what that means to people that come into your life. So why don't you just kind of tell us maybe where that manifested itself and where you are now, and maybe how you can help our listeners, maybe help them understand what this epidemic is and what it's all about.
Yeah, it's not really easy to encapsulate this epidemic in a few minutes, but personally, what happened to me was I can still remember the very first time I took an opiate. I had knee surgery when I was 17 years old. It was emergency knee surgery from basketball. And after the surgery, they started giving me Tylenol with codeine.
Right.
And I just immediately felt good. It was like, whoa, this is good. Now, I was at the beginning stages of what I probably was going to become an alcoholic. I can't say that for certain. But at that point, I didn't drink often, but when I drank to get drunk. I wasn't one to drink only 1 or 2 beers. It was to get the high. And so anyway, one thing leads to another. Well, I end up going off to pharmacy school.
Right.
Yeah. And it wasn't like I decided, hey, I'm going to become a pharmacist so I can steal opiates. That was not the case. What happened was I never forgot that feeling, and that's one thing you'll find with an opiate addict. You never forget that first high. I never forgot that feeling, and when life got a little challenging for me, I just remember going to the shelf in the pharmacy and popping a pill, pain pill. And I struggled with migraine headaches back then, and I often think they were migraine headaches that were made up because I ended up taking the pills to not have migraines,
right.
or if I had aches and pains, and so what started out as a bad habit turned into an addiction, which ended up turning me into a liar, a thief, a cheat. I became someone I didn't want to be, and the road to my bottom, I mean, it happened over a 5-year period, but I went from this person who was a leader, who was very athletic, people looked up to this person who no longer wanted to live, and that was, so what I see going on today, fast forward 30 years, I've been
right.
sober for 30 years.
Congratulations.
Thanks. All my business success came after I got sober. I was at that little corner drugstore stealing from that owner who gave me a second chance and made me his partner. And that's a part of the story that people need to hear, that when you wonder about giving somebody a second chance, because my life sober, I've been able to touch a lot of people and help a lot of people. But what's happened to me recently, and it probably is about 3-4 years ago, when I started reading the articles about people ODing and dying, and the shift from pills to heroin because the pills aren't as available. It's like, man, somehow I need to do something. And I'd already started a recovery service at Ginsburg Church back in 2005. Scott, about that, and we, it's really good. It's still going on today, but I stepped away from that 2 years ago, and I thought there's something else. Well, I like to write, so I started writing this book of my journey through opiate addiction, not in any way to glorify me, but to give it to that mom, that dad, that addict, the brother, the sister, the person that's like, we call it step 0. There's 12 steps in recovery. The first step is admitting you're powerless and your life's unmanageable, but step 0 is, what the heck's wrong with me? Right. Or what the heck's wrong with my son? Why can't he stop? So I just chronicalized this story, and I'm about a third of the way through it. hope to have the book done by the end of the year. And I've written 2 other books, and I always take all proceeds from any books that I write and give them back to recovery-oriented mission work. So.
Well, one of the things, obviously there's a stigma, with this conversation, whether it be alcoholism or addicts, and it's hard. And I'm really passionate about this subject, and I work with people at Southbrook, and so first of all, thanks for being vulnerable enough to share, because you're enormously successful, and we were talking about this a little bit around. I think what a lot of people don't understand is, unless they're an addict, they're not going to understand. So if you don't understand it, be grateful you don't.
Right.
And the bottom can be a beautiful place to be, as long as you know you're there, because you got 2 options: you can climb, or unfortunately, you can dig. So when we talk about this issue of opioids, so a lot of it comes through pain, medication, and a lot of it comes to our youth because of sports.
Right. It starts out because they've been written a prescription that they needed at the time, but they had that feeling that you had, and they remembered it.
Yeah, and what a lot of people really, I think, need to understand, one is we're probably going to lose about 800 people in Montgomery County to overdose in 2017. We might lose 60,000 people in the United States this year to overdose, and whether it be opioid abuse or heroin overdose. It is an absolute epidemic in our country, and unfortunately, Montgomery County, where we are, is one of the leading counties in the United States. And so what's complicated around that is, those people with great big hearts want to try to fix it from their understanding, which is good, and it's moral, but it's deeper than that. It's a bigger issue.
Yeah. And even just to piggyback on that, Scott, we were having a conversation before we started. I don't even know where to start or what to say or what to do, and so I direct most of my attention to my kids, who are 15 years old, and trying to educate them and talk to them. And I'm probably going about that wrong too, because I'm showing them the articles about, look what happened to this person. They used one time and now they're dead. Like, don't use. And that's probably not the right way to talk to them either. And so what can people do? I
think one of the issues that I think is important to say is the fact that I don't think anyone wakes up out of bed and says, you know what, I think I'm going to put heroin in my body. I think I'm going to stick a needle in my arm.
Right.
So I think people need to understand that. I think what people need to understand is the progression of that. So it manifests itself in self-worth and in pain. And we live in this world of social media, so am I good enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I smart enough? Do people like me? Do they not like me? And society, and especially younger people, fight with that. So then they're given a prescription drug that tells them, their brain, that chemical tells them something that's amazing. It's euphoric.
Right, you feel great.
And they feel something, and chemically something happens in the brain. And unfortunately, this is what happens. So I get a prescription drug, I like it, I want more of it, I can't get it, so maybe I look in mom's medicine cabinet, I go to grandma's medicine cabinet, I go to my friends, my neighbors. And then I start stealing stuff out of my house to buy more. And then all of a sudden, that just becomes really complicated in my life and way too expensive, because heroin is cheap. That's the problem. I don't think anyone says, hey, do you want to try some heroin, and thinks about putting that needle in their arm first time.
Right.
It is a slow progression, and unfortunately, it is a slow drop to the bottom.
Yeah. And what I'm interested in is, you had access. So a lot of these people have an access issue, like Scott was saying, and they do things to get it. And you said, I took it from this pharmacy that I worked at, but you had an access problem. How did you wake up? How did you know? How did you get help?
In the beginning, I can remember a moment when it's like, oh my Lord, I'm addicted, because I was I had moved over to cough syrups, which had alcohol, Sudafed, which is a stimulant, it's like speed, and the hydrocodone. So I was getting this perfect blend, and I was finding myself at first at bedtime always having to take that to be able to just kind of chill out and fall asleep and enjoy that euphoric effect. So I had this, oh my Lord, I'm an addict thought early on, but I'm also a pharmacist, and I'm also stealing it, okay? Which means I'm in trouble. So I got to whip this on my own. So I roll up my sleeves, and I said, there's nothing I've ever not been able to whip. Like I said, I'm a jock, I'm a leader. I got more willpower than the average human being. So I decided to go cold turkey.
How'd that work for you?
And I'll tell you today, one of the primary reasons people, if you go through withdrawal one time and you relapse, you don't want to go through withdrawal again. Because I didn't know what I was about to face when I decided I'm going cold turkey.
Oh, wow. That's super honest.
Withdrawal is the flu tenfold, hundredfold. So I got through that, but I can remember like it happened yesterday. It was in 1984, and I was playing basketball, and we won a big game, and I was feeling good, and went to the bar with the guys afterwards. Of course, at that point, I had no education that alcohol would trip a switch that lead me back to my drug of choice. Had a couple beers, and next thing I know, I'm back up the pharmacy that night getting my fix in, and I'm back to the races. Well, now, every time the thought goes through my mind, I got to stop. I'm thinking, I'm going to have to take a month off.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're non-functional.
Wow.
It's mental, it's physical.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really. So when we talk about, so we've got customers out there that obviously we read about it. We hear a lot about this, and so we have a lot of data. So the number of prescription drugs that a customer might come in touch with, as we do data analytics and look at that. But that's just identifying, do I have a problem?
Right. When we look at controlled substances and scripts by patient, we can see, and then we can normally match it up with your inpatient rehab. We can start to see it, right?
Yeah.
So do I have a problem? Yeah, I do. Now what?
And I think one of the issues too is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is the fact that do we have a drug distribution problem? Or do we have a drug use problem? This is just my personal opinion. Drug distribution means more jails, more crime, basically just stiffer fines. But it's probably not the real issue. The real issue is drug use, which is so pain. And in the history of healthcare, what we've really shed from our healthcare system is access to mental health and substance abuse treatment. Mm-hmm. So even if my tail's fallen off and I'm lost, one is, do I have access to it, which is tough. It's difficult. Do I have coverage for it, which is also very difficult. And then the third thing, and you brought this up, is like, I'm just afraid to say that. Like, I think from our eyes, I could say, well, I'm overweight, right? I get that. But what human being wants to say, I think I'm an addict?
Right. And so you try to fix it yourself without help.
And then they just hide. So have you seen other employers address this in a different way? Maybe talking to their workforce a different way, or talking to people in a different way?
Yeah, I haven't personally, but I spoke about my problem with my employees when I did the monthly meetings with them and during the leadership, because basically my word to them was, don't give up. I was at rock bottom, wanting to die, and because of my belief in a power greater than me, and because of tools I was given and I listened, I was able to dig myself out. So I haven't seen other companies, but I will say this. I think, Emery, you asked me about how I got help, because I was trying to do it on my own. Well, my wife, who's very wise, she knew something wasn't right. Now, this is like a 5-year period of progression, getting worse and worse and worse. And I won't go into the details of this whole mess, but she put together an intervention team. And I came home from work one day, and there sits these 4 people. And it was the boss that I was ripping off, it was my brother, it was my wife, and it was a guy who was 5 years sober from drugs and alcohol, that I used to laugh at and make fun of as the town drunk,
Right.
So this guy's sitting in my living room, and it took them 3 hours to convince me to go to treatment. I mean, I went nuts on him. I put my fist through the bathroom door. I was so angry at him. But denial is what kills us. It's not the drug, because we just don't want to admit it. So I went to treatment, and I listened. Went to treatment for 5 weeks, then I went inpatient, then I went to intensive outpatient for 6 months. Well, I also had the DEA now at this point, because my boss, it's a felony to not report a felony.
Right.
So I'm doing urine screens at least once a week randomly for like 2 or 3 years. But that treatment that was given to me because I had insurance coverage is why I'm here today.
Oh, wow.
And that's the problem we have today is if somebody diagnoses me with cancer, and I think there's like 4 stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
The health system pretty much knows this is what we need to do. Okay.
Yeah, there's a protocol. Yeah.
With addiction, I consider opiate addiction a stage 4 addiction.
Yeah, that's
it
fair.
needs the most aggressive treatment.
Right.
But today it's
They just started.
go to detox,
Yeah.
here's some outpatient,
Yeah.
and it's just, there's no continuum of care.
And speed to care and access to care is
Right.
really, really hard to get
Right.
to. Yeah, really hard to get to. So when we talk about even, to our customers and our listeners, one of the things too, especially for, for young children and or students, there are so many people that start off because they had an injury or an accident. So just because a physician prescribes a medication doesn't mean you shouldn't have a conversation with your physician about that medication.
Right.
So better understanding. So right now they're suing the drug manufacturers on this because of this epidemic.
Right. And blaming them basically for starting it.
Yeah, they own their own side of the street, and they're part of the issue, but they're not the problem. Finding and going after drug manufacturers for this issue isn't
It's
really.
not going to solve it.
It's not going to solve it. They're certainly responsible for part of it. Education is part of that too, and then access to mental health is also really, really important.
Right. And I think, for employers, because I know oftentimes that we've got employers listening, and hopefully this helped you personally. I think everybody has been touched by someone they know, someone who's a family member, or someone that they work with who's had someone facing opioid addiction or alcohol addiction, and they want to know, what can I do to help? And I think support, talking to someone, listening, encouragement, which you received, and knowing that there's hope, right? For employers, I mean, we're just at the beginning of this, I think, in terms of, are we doing workplace education? Is there a place for that? How do we do it? Because it is going to impact your workforce. I'm sure it already has, in hiring and even maybe maintaining long-term employees. It can come from anywhere. It's that everyone has a different feeling when they take an opioid. Some people aren't affected in a way that others are immediately. And I think that everyone should just be aware of it.
Yeah, and the great reference point, one of the reasons, one is thanks for being here. Secondly, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing the story. Because I think one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on, one is, you're enormously successful. You're an author. You've done a lot of great things in your life. And you had this epic battle 30 years ago.
Right.
So to our listeners, one is, you're telling this story. It's a 30-year-old story. But that story is happening today, right down the street. Could be your son, could be your daughter, could be your wife, could be your sister, could be you. And what's amazing about recovery and the gift of that is the restoration and the redemption through people that have said, yeah, like I made a mistake, epic failure, but it didn't beat me. It didn't have to beat me.
Right.
And it's available if you're just willing to just give up and just say, like, I'm not, like, tap out, like I just surrender to this. So Jay, thanks for being here.
Thanks
I appreciate
for having
it.
Yeah, we appreciate you sharing your
Appreciate
story.
it.
We do.
More importantly, thanks for being a great friend.
Yeah.
So we'll put some facts and figures on around the opioid issues here in Ohio. We're addressing those. The pharmaceutical industry is starting to touch on this and do some really strategic things. Counties, city government, churches. There is help available. Is it all in one place? No. But there is a lot of help. And as Ann said, too, I mean, a lot of people that care about solving this big issue. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Side Effects. Thanks for listening and opening your mind. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach us at scott@healthierbirthdays.com.
Or Ann at healthierbirthdays.com. We hope you'll join us next time
on Side Effects.